Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are watching from. My name is AstroViktor, and today we are going to be discussing Venus in the sign of Libra for multiple reasons. Well, Venus in Libra is going to be an important period of time, on one hand, because it's in rulership. So that could be one of the most pleasant placement of Libra. But secondly, Venus is going to start its shadow period on 22 degree of Libra. Shadow period means that it's going to go retrograde. So it's going to go retrograde in the sign of Scorpio, around 8 degree of Scorpio, and it's going to be shifting back into the sign of Libra. So happy Libra season, happy Venus in Libra season. You're going to have to start watching for what is happening in the next few weeks in your life, because Venus, on one hand, is extremely busy, right? So it's going to be activating the cradle configuration that I spoke about last week in depth. So today I'm just going to give you a bit of a summary of what is going to be happening, because you can revisit the previous video that I made. So I'm going to be focusing a little bit on this Venus in Libra transit and what to watch out for, because of course the shadow period is about to kick off, and therefore you can start seeing already some of the themes that might be popping up for you. So that's the agenda for today. I hope you guys are doing well. And also, we're going to touch base on Chiron being retrograde as well in the sign of Taurus. And one of the reasons why we're going to do that is because Venus is the dispositor of Chiron. So the Venusian movement right now is actually super important. So let's get going. What is happening? I mean, Chiron went retrograde on 3rd of August, right? And it went retrograde on 0.52 degrees of Taurus, and it's going to last for about 5 months. And retrograde is a review, reflection. There's a lot of internal healing to be done. So where does the internal healing have to happen? Well, in the Taurus part of your chart. So where is Taurus? For example, Taurus is falling into my third house, right? But let's look at some of the Taurian themes here. First of all, Chiron is pretty much not moving right now. So you need to be watching out for any type of unresolved issues in the Taurus cusp of your chart right now, because it can feel like it's like magnified. You're going to be able to notice them a lot more. And the fact that Venus is going to be shifting sign very shortly, in a couple of hours time, it's going to even amplify further, right? So Taurus is about money, self-worth, what we owe, what we have, so our possessions, but also it's a bit of a safety blanket as well. Taurus even can represent the earth as well as the physical body, and then how we approach pleasure and comfort in our lives. So we are going to be becoming more aware of the healing needs to be done in one of these territories. So, for example, when we are talking about money, this could be about scarcity. It could be about the fear of not having enough money, for example, because Taurus is about safety. It's about your saving account. It's about how much money I've got in my wallet, right? And then maybe I look at my bank statement and I'm super scared that I don't have anything there, right? But also it could indicate, because Taurus can represent gifts as well, that I have got issues of receiving, giving, or sharing, right? Or receiving certain type of support from others. Or it could indicate that I would like to get out there and then do a bit of a shopping, but I looked at my bank statement and I don't want to do it. Why? Because I'm afraid that I'm not going to have enough the following day. So it can carry a lot of financial anxiety. And what does financial anxiety does? It's going to paralyze us. So we're going to have to be able to deal with all those. Now, of course, this is especially true if Taurus is in your second, fifth, eighth, or 11th house cusp. By the way, recently I wrote an article about how to approach money in your natal chart that is available on my Facebook. group. So if you are not part of my Facebook group, recently I have been posting articles almost every couple of days, sometimes once a day as well. So my recent article is about alcohol and how to work with alcohol. So you might want to be checking out my Facebook group as well, so you can get some extra kind of, articles, extra knowledge. But let's go back to this Chiron in the sign of Taurus, right? So also it could indicate such things that I feel super like I don't feel pretty enough. Okay, so I look into the mirror and then I see a physical body there that may be saggy a little bit, and I feel like I have to tone up, or my physical needs, for example, in a partnership, is not being met. Obviously, if Chiron is currently going through your fifth house or the seventh house, that could be a topic there. It could really talk to us about that somehow you are undervaluing yourself, right? It feels like that no matter how much time and effort I put into something, it doesn't get honored, whether it's financially, emotionally, or physically, but something to do with kind of like a bit of an imbalance here, right? And therefore, where does that lead? I feel unsatisfied. It's kind of like I'm starving, right? Starving for having more love, for example, in your life, having more appreciation, having more beauty. And Taurus also represents food as well. So it could really highlight topics around food, such as why do I need to eat so much? What poison do I put into my body, right? Because Taurus is one of the signs that is actually connected to routine. So it's not just Virgo, but all earth signs are really connected to routine as well. So, sometimes what we do is we have got certain type of ways of soothing our pain, right? And we might be using food to do so. Now, remember, Chiron went into the sign of Taurus on June 19th, right? So that's going to be the very first time ever Chiron stations retrograde in the sign of Taurus. So the very first retrograde period in a new sign, it feels like it's always more intense than the rest of them, because we are not necessarily used to that new energy type of you know like we haven't integrated that into our lives yet, right? So one of the questions that might be popping up with this Chiron retrograde in the sign of Taurus is that what do I need to have to feel secure? Or imagine, for example, if Chiron is going through your 10th house, and then maybe you have got a job offer, and but maybe it is paying less than your previous job. So there could be a lot of hesitation happening there, right? And Chiron is asking you, is it because you feel that you don't deserve to earn enough money? Chiron in Taurus is a little bit like, as soon as I hit a kind of like a marker in my bank account, then all of a sudden the brain switches on. The fear is switching on. All my days I have made more than, let's say, $10,000. Now I kind of have to spend it, because there is a poverty mindset with Chiron in the sign of Taurus, right? So it's very much about you having to look at what's going to nourish your physical body as well as your soul as well. And Taurus is one of the most stubborn signs of all. So what area of life am I stubborn? What area of life kind of like I'm scared to kind of change up a little bit, right? So Chiron in Taurus can really talk to us about our attachment styles, an attachment style to something typically that is unhealthy. Now, the reason why we had to talk about this Chiron is because Venus is disposing Chiron. So, there's basically a dispositor chain happening here, and Chiron has to report to Venus. However, Chiron will be returning to the sign of Aries. Now, that's going to be happening on 17th of September, and Chiron is going to be touching 27, 28, and 29 degree of Aries, right? So the shift is actually very important here, because in the sign of Taurus, we are looking at whether we get enough support, whether we have got the self-worth we need to be able to initiate something. Or in the sign of Aries, do I have the right to be an unapologetic version of myself? So in the next 1.5 months, really, I would say that you need to be checking out your, what is triggering what your vulnerabilities are. And instead of kind of like getting scared of them, you're going to have to take notes of them, because then you know that during the Venus retrograde, it's going to be something that you have to be able to work with. Remember, Venus retrograde is going to start its journey in the sign of Scorpio, right? So it means that Venus will be opposing Chiron 3 times. Okay, so therefore that's actually very important there. Okay, so, but Venus moves into the sign of Libra. So like I said, Venus will be making quite important aspects here, right? So on one hand, let's just talk a little bit about this Venus archetype, right? Because Venus is in rulership in the sign of Libra. So Venus moves into the sign of Libra on August 6th, right? It enters its home sign, and it's going to emphasize that the balance, negotiations, contractual agreements, but also your aesthetic choices as well, and even your partnership dynamics. Now, August 31st, Venus crosses 22 degrees of a Libra. And that's going to be very important because that's when the Venus shadow period starts. So any agreements, business partnerships, major purchases, or relational shifts that begin around that time will be revisited, will be reevaluated during kind of like that autumn retrograde window. I also find it interesting that Venus moves into its pre-shadow period on August 31st. That's exactly when the Saturn and Jupiter trine is going to be happening as well. Now, Venus will station retrograde on October 3rd, and it's going to be happening on 8 degrees of Scorpio. And then it's going to retrograde back into the sign of Libra on October 25th, 2026. Okay, and then it's going to be stationing direct on November 14th, 2026, and then it's finishing the retrograde journey on the 22 degree of Libra. And once it finishes kind of like the 22 degree of Libra, it's going to be about clarification and the final decision around the themes kind of brought up during the shadow period. Okay, or that's when things are going to be solidifying pretty much. And then pretty much the post-shadow period ends late December 2026. So why the 22 Libra degree matters quite significantly? Because imagine that, for example, you are a freelancer, right? And you are ready to kind of like get into a new partnership. And during that October, November kind of retrograde period, maybe certain type of unexpected hidden costs or ambiguous workload kind of terms come to light. And because the process originated in the shadow zone, maybe it's going to be about having to renegotiate terms around, let's say, November 14th before establishing a permanent arrangement or a agreement somehow. Or because Venus represents finances, I mean, imagine it's in your 4th house, right? And then you are ready to buy a home or make a large kind of like purchase in mid-September. So because Venus governs valuation and aesthetics, it's like purchasing a big ticket item during a shadow period often leads to some issues. Okay, so let's say if it's a home, it could be a structural defect or overpaying someone compared to the market value, or we can experience that a buyer's remorse as well, especially once Venus turns direct in mid-November. Or Venus in the sign of Libra is about partnership choices as well. Or even it could represent workplace dynamics as well, because Libra is not just about romantic connections, but any type of connections with others. So maybe you are ready to make certain type of arrangements that looks kind of smooth on the surface, But as Venus moves into Scorpio and retrogrades back to that 22-degree Libra later on, there could be unspoken leverage issues or power imbalances kind of like popping up. Okay, so therefore, the shadow phase could be a very ideal time to test ideas out, to kind of look at how lukewarm, for example, the water is in that relationship. Do we need to kind of spice it up, or do I need to walk out of it, and so forth? But I think treat September kind of agreements and proposals a little bit with a pinch of salt. Maybe I'm not saying don't sign any type of contractual agreement, but I would say that document everything. You know, leave room for adjustments and certain type of negotiations. I would use this period of time to audit, but not necessarily finalize things. Okay. So we can really use this shadow period or this Libra season to identify where financial or interpersonal balance is kind of like lacking, rather than trying to fix something immediately. Okay. Now, I also looked at what fixed star do we have on 22-degree Libra, and the first thing that comes to your mind is most likely Speaker, right? Because that is sitting on 24-degree of Libra. I would like to remind you, by the way, that when Venus and Mars conjunction happened on Speaker, that's when the war started between Russia and Ukraine. So what really it means that every 4 years, Venus goes retrograde in the same signs. Okay, so Venus has got this 8-year cycle. Today, I'm not necessarily going to talk about that because let's not talk about it. Okay, but so don't necessarily think of having this Venus stationary degree on 22-degree that, oh, it's very close to Speaker, so this should be super good. Right, we also have got Arcturus on 24-degree of Libra as well. However, it really feels to me that this is a decision or an agreement that is going to get initiated here, and it's going to get tested somehow. So the test of contract, the test of commitments, and the test of kind of like evaluating models, for example, whether it would work or not. Now, actually, on 22-degree of Libra, we have got quite a bit of an eruptive star sitting there, and that's Carina. And this is about, well, why it's so interesting star, why it's such an interesting star is because it has got sudden changes in brightness. And so having Venus there, it kind of indicates to me that it's really kind of like up and down. Sometimes it's super bright and the future looks good. And then all of a sudden we can get into this dark mode as well, right? And that would be very much the Scorpionic retrogression anyway. So it feels like that there is kind of like a contractual agreement getting drafted somehow. And Libra represents fairness, right? So fairness requires a lot of honesty about our needs and wants and kind of like the terms as well. And Venus retrograde here is going to bring up the topic of mutual compromise, for example. Imbalances could be popping up, whether things are kind of like one-sided and lopsided a little bit. Those could be popping up in October. And therefore, it's something that we have to be rebalancing in our life before Venus stations direct on the 22-degree of Libra again in mid-November. Right? Libra is about diplomacy. So Venus, as Venus travels into Scorpio during, the retrograde before returning to Libra, things that got swept under the rug, those issues are kind of like surfacing up. Okay, so diplomacy during this cycle shifts from a little bit more from the polite nodding and smiling to kind of constructive confrontation, because that's a shift between Libra and Scorpio, right? So therefore, we are resolving uncomfortable realities so that the genuine peace can somehow exist, that we can come up with a fair solution, a win-win scenario for everyone. And therefore, because, excuse me, because Libra is about partnership and fairness, so it really feels like the 22 degree of Libra is like a bit of a recalibration point. Imagine that you feel like you have been carrying this unfair burden, and then the retrograde period exposes the strain in your life, right? And forcing you to create this new baseline of equality before you can move forward. Now, Libra is very associated with beauty and aesthetics as well. So, so therefore you can really kind of like come up with a design concept. You can test the aesthetic directions of a website, for example. You can be rethinking your brand strategies. So this is actually super good for that. But if you have got any type of superficial agreements in your life or any type of unequal terms, it potentially feels like that those are going to be popping up very shortly. And the reason why it's going to be popping up is because, like I said, Venus are going to be super busy this month. I mean, first aspect is Venus is making a trine to Pluto. So, if anything is superficial, any type of relationships are superficial there, or I truly want to understand the motive of someone, then it's all about a bit of an investigation with that Venus and trine Pluto. Right? Of course, if there are difficulties in your relationship, a trine can allow you to address those difficulties. Or if you have got financial issues, you can really feel empowered by the Plutonian trine, right? And then I feel super motivated to get that sorted. You can really recognize in what ways, what is unhealthy, what is unhealthy in your relationships, what type of attachments what type of codependencies I've got, what are my desires, and maybe this trine can help you communicate those. But it is because Pluto's number one aim is to expose. It's going to be exposing power imbalances. So that this retrograde is going to be about kind of like installing those power balances back into your life. So the Venus Pluto trine is happening on the 10th of August, right? And then straight after, Venus is making an opposition to Neptune, and that's happening on the very same day. And that's about yearning. So I'm longing for a beautiful connection. I'm longing for romance. I'm longing for being able to buy a boat, right? Or a yacht or traveling somewhere, depending on where it is happening in your natal chart. And if you have got trouble of, reading your own chart, then reach out to me and I'm very happy to have a consultation with you so that we can decode the Venus retrograde period for you. But of course, Neptune and Venus opposition can also talk to us about forgiveness. It's time to forgive ourselves. It's time to forgive others as well. It heightens compassion, forgiveness. Venus and Neptune is super good for creativity, but also you need to be careful because it can make you super sensitive as well. So I'm having kind of like this deep conversation with someone, Pluto and Venus trine, and then something gets said, and then it triggers an emotional kind of trauma within me. So you see how this Venus shadow period is going to want you to reflect on why you don't feel beautiful, why you don't feel that you deserve to have a meaningful partnership, relationship, friends, and so forth. Okay. Of course, Venus is running into 3 outer planets. So it could really talk to us about kind of like a destined relationship as well. And with Neptune being in the picture, it feels like, oh, it's meant to be. Oh, it's a super ideal partnership, right? Or oh, there is a spiritual reason behind it. And while this kind of like intuition could be super accurate, with an opposition, unfortunately, you can get into a spiritual bypass mode as well. So because it's an opposition, it's very easy to project our insecurities onto others also. And then on the 11th of August, Venus is making a trine to Uranus, right? So that's actually a desire to be authentic, a desire to be free. It's about upgrading our style, or the realization that, you know what, I'm in certain type of relationship loops and I'm meant to be kind of like getting out of these loops, right? Or maybe even it can indicate if you have got a financial contract, we are going to be sitting down and then we are going to talk about the terms and we are going to be upgrading those terms. Or it could indicate that you're going to become very experimental. I mean, if you are single, you can be bumping into someone on the streets, as well as you are experimenting with collaborating with others. How is that going to be generating income for me? So you can really be connecting some really interesting people, for example, or you can be part of groups and associations that might be opening up doors for you. Now, even though Venus is not going to be making free aspects to these outer planets, but I'm still a believer that you need to be watching out what is going to get activated for you in the upcoming 1 month through the next 4 or 5 days, because it feels like it's going to become a topic for you. Why is that? Because Venus is going to move into the sign of Scorpio, and in the sign of Scorpio is going to start squaring, for example, Pluto, right? And then it's going to make a quincunx to Uranus. It's going to make a quincunx to Neptune as well. And that's when there is a realization that certain type of adjustments have to happen in our lives. So we're going to have a yacht configuration. And that's where that fatedness is pretty much coming from. Okay, so now on the day when Chiron went retrograde, by the way, which is on the 3rd of August, Venus was still in the sign of Virgo on 26 degree of Virgo. So Venus was in fall, right? And with Chiron going retrograde and Venus in the sign of Virgo, it's a heavy focus on analyzing the pain, auditing the pain. It's like troubleshooting, right? It's identifying what is broken, what is inefficient in our lives, right? So Chiron retrograde, like I mentioned before, it's turning inward and then reviewing your personal vulnerabilities, how boundaries are breached, your identity struggles and so forth. And with Venus being in a sign of Virgo at that moment, that immediate trigger for that Chiron review comes through a critique. Someone criticizes you. And then you have got this awakening moment. Wow, you know what? This is still a wound within me. Or I'm doing that precise evaluation, right? I'm doing this reality check when it comes to my finances, relationship, commitments, right? But then 3 days after, Venus moves into the sign of Libra. So what does that mean? I'm walking away from the diagnosis. That's what Venus did in the sign of Virgo. And I'm getting into this negotiation mode, right? So it feels like that Venus, once it moves into Libra, it's kind of like elevating that Chiron's review, really. Okay? So therefore, Venus retrograde in the sign of Scorpio / in the sign of Libra really gives us the opportunity to heal, to come up with boundaries, clear agreements, balance relational dynamics. Of course, if you are willing to work on that. Okay, so like Venus in the sign of Virgo is about observation. So did you make any type of observation around August 3rd? Because that's kind of like a diagnostic data that you need for Venus in the sign of Libra to kind of rebalance that, okay? And of course, we're going to apply a bit of a touch of diplomacy, right? So until the 31st of August, that's when Venus enters its shadow period, right? I'm using the diagnostic data to construct these fair kind of structured boundaries rather than kind of falling into arguments or passive aggressive avoidance and so forth. Chiron represents wounds, Virgo is the sign of remedies. So I'm meant to be coming up with remedies around self love as well. So you can see why that's actually very important that Venus was still in the sign of Virgo once Chiron turned retrograde, but then Venus moves into Libra and Scorpio, and how is that going to be adding to our plates? So now this is just going to be one video about Venus going into a shadow period. So this is something that I'm going to be breaking down for you way more a little bit later on. But I thought, it's 6th of August today, and Venus is about to move into sign of Libra. So maybe we should be talking about this today so that you can start a bit of a preparation. Now, let's see if you guys have got any questions. Good evening, Netherlands. Taurus is in my 9th house. Chiron is there natally. Yes, so it means that you are somewhere between age 40 to 42 to 50. Good day, USA. It's funny because my fiance, his moon is in the 9th house. I'm going through that right now. I'm dieting. Nice. I should be on a diet as well, but I can't tell you how much I am unable to. Hi, New York. Please take a moment and thank you very much. Yes, take a moment, please, to click like and subscribe and all those lovely things. That would be so good. Hi, Peru. I have a 24 speaker and Arcturus. Everyone has got 20 speaker and Arcturus on 24 degree of Libra. Right, during Venus retro, no plastic surgery or extreme beauty treatments. Yes, I am not a believer of that. That we shouldn't be doing we shouldn't be doing plastic surgery or extreme beauty treatments. So remember then yes, maybe it's smart not to do that. Not because it wouldn't work, maybe because our expectations are not so clear. That's also the case, for example, with Venus and Neptune opposition, okay? Because with Neptune, it's so easy to have an expectation, right? And when the expectations are not met, then we are projecting something onto the other person. And that's why Neptune is the planet of blaming. So I'm going to be blaming someone for relationship failures and so forth. So this is where Chiron comes into the picture, that we're going to have to be able to look into the mirror and seeing how we are projecting our insecurities onto others. Thank you, Megan, for the sunshine jewels. Curious, having my natal Venus out of bound, does this affect it? And if so, in which way do out-of-bound planets become affected with the aspect? So an out-of-bound planet has got such a Uranian flavor, so it could indicate that you might feel the Venus retrograde period even more intense. Now, remembering that Venus is the planet that goes that Venus is the planet that goes retrograde the least amount of times, okay? So while Mercury goes retrograde 3 times a year, Mars goes retrograde every 2 years, only once every 2 years, but because Mars goes retrograde for a longer period of time, so average Mars retrograde period is about 78 to 82 days. Well, that's the average, okay? Sometimes a little bit shorter and sometimes a little bit longer. So you would think that Mars is going to go retrograde the least amount of times, but actually it's Venus who goes retrograde approximately about every 18, 19 months. But because it's just about 40 days or so, so therefore Venus is the least amount that it spends in retrogradation. So an out-of-bound Venus can feel it more intense in a way that I want to break out, for example, of something stagnant. But it's only important if it triggers something in your natal chart. So remember that. So much came through on the 3rd, as it was the day I went into labor 22 years ago and gave birth on the 4th. Oh, nice. Congratulations. I am Venus in retrograde in Scorpio at 5 degrees. Any comment on if we are born with it? Is there a way to reconnect that to my progressed Venus? So does it mean that you are 40 years old? So are you 40 years old right now? So if you have got Venus retrograde in the sign of Scorpio, and Venus is going to go retrograde in Scorpio, obviously on 8 degree, you are going to be triggered quite significantly. Yes, I would be looking at your progressed Venus, whether progressed Venus, for example, when has it turned directions already, or is it going to be turning direction? So one thing that I would like to remind you is that Venus goes retrograde every 8 years in the same sign. Okay, so because we are 2026, you might want to be going back to 2018 and thinking about what went down in your life around that time. Okay, so this is something that we call as a Venus start point. Now, not every single retrograde is going to be exactly the same, okay? But they carry certain type of similarities. Yeah, so she's 40 years old, obviously, because, yeah, so makes sense. So that kind of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it's surely going to talk to you about somehow having to reevaluate what you love in your life, for example, or how committed you are in partnership, or whether you would like, for example, to have a child, or it is really looking at your creative outlets as well a little bit, such as, do I want to give birth to a creative project? Am I happy in that work where I am in? Obviously, that age 40 is often called as a midlife crisis, which I kind of want you to forget about it. Okay, midlife crisis doesn't necessarily exist. It only existed for a certain amount of people. But anyway, I don't want to get into that. Okay, so that's a psychological concept when the Neptune square Neptune, Pluto square Pluto, and Uranus opposition to Uranus happened around the same time, and that was around age 40. Okay, but that happened in the 60s, 70s. So psychologists came up with this midlife crisis because people went cuckoo. However, nowadays that's not going to be happening. So Pluto squaring your Pluto doesn't happen around the age of 40, for example. It even can happen at the age of 60. Uranus opposition to Uranus is going to be happening around the same time. And with Neptune squaring Neptune can be happening between 36 to 42. Okay, but Pluto might be excluded out of that picture. So anyway, so what I was going to say there is that so you might want to be giving birth to a creative project, for example, but you're going to have to be looking at your own fears because Venus is in the sign of Scorpio, right? And we're going to have to find that internal battery. It has to be recharged. Something has to be rebalanced in your life. And then we're going to have to get going towards those dreams. I was born with Mercury in retrograde and they happen at the same time. Yeah, so Mercury is going to go retrograde as well in water signs also, but I'm going to speak about that separately a little bit closer to the time. Okay, so I have Venus opposition with Neptune also in the natal, maybe breaking free, woo-hoo. Just had my Chiral return, 24, 25 in Aries. Okay, guys, so that's what I wanted to share about Venus today. I think I'm gonna see you potentially on Saturday because we're gonna have to do a bit of a weekly forecast. And Venus has activated this cradle configuration, right? So that's what we spoke about last week. But next week, Mercury is activating the basket configuration as well. So that's going to be quite an exciting one, right? So Mercury is going to be running into all the three outer planets. So therefore, we're going to have to talk about that. So thank you for being here, and I will see you on Saturday. Take care.